I talk to lots and lots of sales leaders, and that is by far their single biggest frustration is bad or ineffective qualification, right? It's like, why do we keep spending our time chasing stuff that's never going to come in? What would it take for you to be that kind of salesperson for your customer, where as a result of that interaction, your customer thinks, I kind of feel better about myself as a result of interacting with Damon?
What is one more thing you could leave us with, either around sense making or your book, Frame Making in Sales?
The one thing I would tell you is this.
What if your biggest barrier to closing deals wasn't about how much confidence your customer had in you, but the confidence they had in themselves? That is the question that Brent Adamson, co-author of the legendary book, The Challenger Sale, has been digging into. Brent is soon to be back with a new book, and in the Frame Making Sale, he shares something surprisingly different. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, we're always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. I'm beyond excited for Brent to be joining me in a moment, and I can't wait to hear from Brent around what he thinks about how sellers can boost buyers' confidence, why shifting from expert to guide is the future of sales, how to help buyers make sense of too much information, and how to navigate complex buying groups with empathy. When you were first working on the research for Challenger Sales, I believe in late 2008, 2009,
Yep.
Did you realize at the time that you were onto something special?
I think the honest answer is no. We knew, so we had a process that we used at the Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, which is the company where we did all this research, which then eventually got bought by Gartner in about 2018. But we had a process by which we could hit. You're a baseball guy, right? So we had a pretty trusted process that we could get doubles every time we got to the plate, right? I mean, and sometimes you'd hit a home run.
Good analogy.
Right. And it was just highly consistent in terms of the quality of work that we could produce because of this process that we would follow. And so we knew we were onto something. It was interesting. We had originally set out, so every year we start out talking to heads of sales saying, what's the biggest challenge you're facing? What do you got to get right this year? What are the things we can help you with? Based on a lot of that research, very few people in the world know about this, and even fewer care. But the Challenger actually started as a study on how to do segmentation better. We were actually going to publish like essentially what today in the SaaS world we call your ICP, right? It's like how to understand your ideal customer profile. It was all about segmentation. And just given what was happening in late 2008, you'll remember, Damon, was, the bottom was about to fall out of the economy. The banks were about to completely fail. Things got really scary really fast. And we were in a meeting talking about our segmentation study, which started to feel very quickly kind of irrelevant. And Matt Dixon was in the room, and Matt's a good friend, and he was co-author in the Challenger Sale and was leading the research team at the time. And so I think we should just write about sellers. I think we should just figure out what makes the best sellers better than everyone else. And we shifted gears and started working on that. And part of that came from conversations I and other people on the team were having, where we would talk to these heads of sales and say, what are you working on? We all know it's a terrible year. It's a tough year. Interestingly enough, David, you'll appreciate it because it sounds like you were just recently going down the track of figuring out comp plans. But the single biggest question or challenge in 2008 for heads of sales were comp plans. Because what do I do when my entire team's at 40% of goal? Do I just it's like, yeah, they've all lived by the sword, but are they willing to die by the sword? Because that's about where we're going to go, because no one's buying anything. But the thing that intrigued us or piqued our interest, other than dude, I don't know, that's a really hard question, was almost every one of them would say, but you know what the weird thing is? Every one of my sellers is at 40% of goal, not because they're not selling, but because no one's buying. But almost inevitably, they would say something like, but I got this one person on the team that's still crushing it. They're at 120% of goal in an environment, in the single worst sales environment in recent memory, if not ever. And they would simply ask, how is that even possible? What are they doing that is so different? And our legitimate answer was, we have no idea. But that was sort of but maybe we'll go find out. That would actually be really interesting if we could go figure out what these best sellers are doing, particularly in this time where the variation or the difference between the best and everyone else was so obvious and so clear. Now felt like a good time to go figure out what is truly, what accounts for that difference. And that ultimately led to this research that became Challenger. We debuted it in May of 2009. And I'll never forget that very first meeting. Kevin Hendrick, who's since retired, he was one of the heads of sales at ADP, was in the room, and Kevin was off to my left, and he was looking at this research. And even then, on that very first day in May, Damon, it was blowing them away. This is I don't even know what to say to this, because part of the message, of course, was Challenger wins. Part of that story, of course, is that relationship builders were so less likely to win. And he's flipping through this binder because we all used binders back then. And he looked up to me and said, I'm looking at my Salesforce. Is Brent, every single one of them is a relationship builder. I don't know what to do. He says, can you come train my team to be challengers? And I looked at him and said, Kevin, well, no, because we just found this in our data like 2 weeks ago. I was like, it was literally like 10-day-old research. But that eventually became keynotes, which I traveled all over the world, presented. After a while, it became, that kind of resonance became incredibly strong. So I walked into Matt's office one day and I said, I think we should write a book because this is really like resonating like nothing else we've ever seen. So that's a long answer to the question. Did we kind of know what we had? We didn't know what we had in 2008, but by 2010, it was pretty clear we were onto something special. Right about that time, we met Neil Rackham, who lives actually not too far from me here in Leesburg, Virginia. He has a writing cottage because he's fancy like that. And he's a good dude. And so we started talking about the book, and he, of course, is the author of Spin Selling, and Spin Selling was kind of the book at the time. And we went to lunch together, and we got his advice, and we were talking about the preface, which he wrote for us. And he said something then, Damon, that was really interesting. Again, 2010, I guess. He looks at, just so you guys know, he says, this thing, because he was talking about his own experience with Spin. He says, this thing has legs that you can't even imagine. He says, you think this is going to run its course in about a year and a half, and it'll be years from now, and you'll still be talking about it. And that was 13 years ago. Isn't that wild?
It is wild. I mean, I told you before we got started, I was with 12 of my buddies last night, and 10 read it. You know, I would assume though, I mean, it was very disruptive. I mean, so did you get a lot of pushback when people, because at the time, and you know, in the decades before, everything was about a relationship. Go and have a couple martinis at lunch, you know, even, you know, maybe that's the 80s, but you must have got a lot of.
Yeah, when was that? I would love to know, when was this like mythical 3 martini lunch? Because can we all just go back to that? That was like, it sounds kind of amazing, doesn't it?
I think it was in the mid 80s. I remember, my dad was a president of a bank, and I would go meet him at Jeremiah Towers restaurant in the city, and all those guys be with their martinis and the customers. So I think that was one back then. But yeah, you must have got a lot of pushback.
We did. And it wasn't so much that, you know, the dimensions of pushback were manifold. There were many. We kind of upset the apple cart and had a big machine to upset the apple cart, because CB had a pretty big marketing team. We ran these events all over the world. And that was my job at the time, was to travel and run those meetings. So I was in front of heads of sales weekly all over the world for, 10 years, and particularly about that time. And it got really intense. And so there was things like, relationships do matter. How can these guys say that? They don't know what they're talking about. And of course, as you dug in deeper, you found out like, no, we believe they matter. It's just, what is the basis of the relationship? Is it familiarity? Is it martinis? Or is it your ability to bring insight to the company that challenges their thinking? So we squared that circle eventually. These guys aren't saying anything new. My best people were challengers already. There's nothing new here, to which we'd always say like, no, we know your best people are doing this already, because it wouldn't have shown up in the data if it wasn't doing it already. You guys just gave it a name. How dare you? It's like, well, there's actually real power and value in naming things and putting frameworks around things. So there was just a lot of, just particularly among other sales trainers who were quickly getting crowded out, there was a lot of either angst or frustration or, like, what about me? And a lot of people were just kind of mad. But we all seemed to get over it. I think what happened was, over the next 3 to 4 years, it started generating really just incredible results for companies. And then everyone kind of quickly got on board with some version of it. A lot of people talked about insight selling at the time, this big book that came out shortly thereafter. And about 4 or 5 years later, just about every CEO in the world woke up in the same morning and said, we need to be a thought leader, which is sort of a watered down version of challenger. So now we're all trying to be thought leaders. And this whole idea, I think, is there's a longer historical thing. I won't, unless you want me to, I won't go through the whole thing, but it's like we'd all tried to compete on products and found that our products were getting, commoditized, and there was fast followers. So we then said, okay, we're all going to compete on solutions, which is, bundles of products wrapped in services. And then even those solutions started getting commoditized. You think UPS versus FedEx, they have incredible solutions, but they're very similar to one another. So then sort of right about this time, where the sort of window of differentiation on solutions was also closing, people began to look around and say, what's my new biggest incremental opportunity for standing out in the marketplace? And right about that time is when Challenger hit. So it was like lightning in a bottle. And it offered up this completely different perspective on how to stand out in the marketplace, which isn't your product or your solution, but your insight, your ability to teach customers something new about their business. It wasn't what you sell, but how you sell. And so all that language started to really, really resonate. And we were kind of off to the races. And so that's it was an interesting time. And again, we were backed by this machine that just gave us access to the world of sales leaders. And so it was kind of a perfect combination.
And then came along the challenger customer, right? Where you're
Yep.
kind of looking at the insight, in the head of the buyers themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that started, about 3-4 years later, and it's continues to be the work I do today. And the new book that's coming out in the fall is really, it is absolutely about selling and marketing, but its starting point isn't selling or marketing. Its starting point is buying and what's happening on the buying side of things. And this is why, and I think that really matters in a lot of ways, David, because when I'm on stages with, whether it's the new stuff or challenger customer, challenger, or challenger, it's all kind of the same story or the same sort of physics or dynamic, which is, and I've learned this at the School of Hard Knocks, like really, literally the hard way. If you get on stage, particularly if someone like I get on stage, like I'm a sales anthropologist, I'm a researcher. God knows I've been in thousands of sales calls, but I'm not a seller per se. I study it, right? And if I get up on stage in front of, say, 500 people and say, you're selling wrong, and here's a better way to sell, go sell this way, that goes down like a ton of bricks.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, who the bleep
A
are
lead
you?
balloon.
Tell me,
Like, who's this
right?
guy? Yeah.
Exactly right. And then they start looking around, and you people in the back of the room with their arms crossed, and they're all pissed off. And this is literally, I learned this the hard way. And so what I've learned is it's about positioning, which is, and I don't mean this in an insincere way. I think it's actually true, which is, I often tell sellers, like, my job isn't here to say you're broken and I'm here to fix you, because I think we'd all agree a lot of you guys are doing great already. What I'd like to lay out for you is a story of not how the world of selling is changing, but how the world of buying is changing, because the world of buying is changing actually quite dramatically and quite rapidly. And if the world of sales is not, and the world of buying is, then what happens when you take the old world of selling and run it into the teeth of the new world of buying is things start actually falling apart. So if we can understand that new world of buying and how it's changing, then we can talk about how we take what's good already and adapt it to remain good. So my job is here to make you good at selling. My job here is to keep you good at selling. And that seems to go down more easily.
Essentially, what you're talking about is, thought leadership came in. Everybody wanted to be a thought leader. Then you have UPS and you have FedEx as an example, where there's some pretty good products out there, and so it's about value. I mean, it's hard to sell on value when there's all these good products and people are putting this information out there. And so then at that point, did you decide, or you thought, hey, look, we got to move beyond just challenger sales or just challenger and find a new way to look at it?
2015 to 2017, 2018, we began to really, there's like disturbances in the forest, right? You begin to see like customers, buying groups getting bigger and bigger, and the amount of information they're counting is getting higher and higher. And what you start to see pretty dramatically, even pre-pandemic, is customers really starting to struggle a little bit to just make decisions. And so this led to the work that we wrote for HBR, and some of the people I wrote it with had just departed Gartner, so they didn't get to have the byline like Nick Toman, but we all wrote it together. And
sense making, right?
Sense making for sales is the name of that article, and that is now a chapter. I think it's chapter 4 in the new book. The point is that customers are just overwhelmed with too much information, and it's high quantities of high quality information, which makes it really, really hard to kind of just figure out what to do in the first place. And where that starts to get really interesting then, Damon, is if you take the challenger sort of approach and run it into that world, even that begins to wobble a little bit, right? Because I may have this great insight that changes the way you think about your business, challenges your mental model, shows you new ways to make money, save money, all the things we talk about challenger. But if your customers are already overwhelmed with too much information, too many people saying too many smart things, then you're just another person, it's like, or another voice or another text. It's like, I'll just take your white paper and put it on the pile with the other 4 white papers I got to read. And I was doing a meeting in Palo Alto where a head of sales said, but Brent, I did what you told me to do. All my competitors are telling my customers to zig, and we're out there doing challenger. We're telling our customers they need to zag. And I said, yeah, but from a customer's perspective, they're telling me to zig and they've got data and experts and, evidence. So you're telling me to zag and you've got data and experts and evidence. And now I'm just confused at a higher level and I don't know what to do. So maybe I better research this more. Let me take a little longer. Why don't you call me in 6 months while I try to figure this out? And so things just start to slow down. They gum up. And this is what we didn't anticipate with Challenger in 2009, because it's just a different world, is the word I use to think about today is the word context. We need to think about what your insight looks like in the context of everything else that customers are going through. And this, by the way, is, and if you think, well, how did that happen? It's just kind of a fun footnote, but I think it's actually real. It's pretty interesting, is because product selling was no longer offering opportunities for differentiation the way it used to, and because solution selling was no longer offering opportunities for differentiation the way it used to, somewhere around 2013, 14, CEOs realized maybe I could set myself apart in the marketplace by just showing up as very smart, by being a thought leader, by demonstrating to customers that we have cutting edge solutions that are world-class problems. And so, right about that time, HubSpot said, hey, I've got software for that. So now all of a sudden we had marketing automation, and marketers woke up and said, hey, I've got a strategy for that. We'll call that content marketing. And so we built this entire machine to create massive amounts of not just content, but really good content, backed by data, backed by evidence. I call it the Smartness arms race, because we were all in a hurry to demonstrate that we were smarter than our competitors. And, it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but I think it's true. I think the only one that lost in the Smartness arms race is your customers, because now they're just overwhelmed at a higher level, trying to just figure out what the heck to do in the first place. And the last one, as you fast forward into today, Damon, I mean, we now live in a world post-pandemic, and in the current political climate and the current environmental degradation, and just what's going on in the world, and certainly right now with what's going on in our economy, which is no one really knows, is just and then of course AI everything, and what was AI 6 months ago is not AI today, because it's changing constantly and developing constantly. Which if what's the old saying? It's may you it's I hope that you get to live in exciting times, right? Well, welcome to your worst nightmare / best dream. But it's it's so hard to make decisions as companies in this kind of environment. And so now we're just overwhelmed. And so if it just feels like today in this world where customers, it's there's so many people, and we talk to big enterprise companies where they'll have 60, 70, 80 people in a buying group. I talked to the president of an ERP company the other day.
How does that even work? How do you?
Well, that's the point. It doesn't, right? It literally doesn't, right? Yeah. I talked to a president. It's a good friend of mine named Randy. I talked to him the other day. He sells ERP software into car dealerships, and he was talking to a big national car chain that we all know. And he said the buying group, Brent, was 20 people. But he said the big problem with the fact wasn't just that there were 20 people in the buying group, is that these 20 people had never made a decision together. It's not that they ever made a purchase together. They'd never made any kind of decision together. So they didn't even understand sort of what are almost like the Robert's rules. You remember those? What is the process by which we go through the deliberation to make a choice? It's not do we think you're great or not great? Do we want your product versus the competitor's product? So literally we don't know how to do this. Do you know what I mean? And so that's where so much of what I'm writing about today is really falling is,
When that happens, a lot of times what could have been a priority then just gets stuck down the line, right? Because we can't come to any kind of consensus on this. So let's go pivot in another direction, which leads to no decision.
That's exactly right. Or let's just put it off, or let's study it more. Let's give it to a tiger team and have them report back, right? And then next time it comes. And maybe you slog your way through that decision. But what we found is that leads to just muscle memory of pain, right? So what happens is the next purchase that comes up, it's oh God, I don't want to do that again. Why don't we just hold off on this? And so there's this inertia around status quo that builds and builds and builds, because as each one of these purchase decisions becomes that much more difficult and painful and fraught, I'm less and less and less inclined to make more purchase decisions going forward. And in that environment, I've often joked, it's kind of amazing to me that commerce still happens at all. I mean, it's and I said that once, or I had to research it at Gartner, and he looked at me, his name's Eric, he's a good dude, and he said, Brett, that's really stupid. And it's he said, of course commerce is still going to happen. Companies still have to buy things, machines have to run, factories have to, replenishables. He said, of course commerce is still going to happen. But I looked at him and said, but Eric, I said, I know, but it does make me honestly wonder how much more commerce could happen. If customers just felt a little bit more confident, not in your product or your brand, but felt more confident in themselves.
All the latent opportunities.
Right? And I just think that may be the single biggest unlock of the global economy today, is just helping people feel more confident in themselves to make bigger decisions.
And that's what your new book's all about, right? Framing.
That's right.
So how would you even, how do you define what frame making is?
Okay. So the book's called The Frame Making Sale, which I suppose has an echo of the Challenger sale. It's on Amazon now. So you go wherever you buy books, you can pre-order it now. It'll
come
be
out
in September 9th.
Right.
That's right. September 9th, which is my dad's birthday. So it'll come out then. I'm out keynoting on it. We're building the training. We're training companies on this now. But the whole idea of the frame making sale starts from a data-driven perspective, because of how I'm wired, and the work we did at Gartner. And that's all this stuff is publicly available. It's all cited back to Gartner when it's Gartner work. But we found this a really interesting thing at the time, which is the single biggest driver of a high-quality, low-regret deal. So a deal where the customer buys the bigger solution with a broader scope, with a higher price point, and feels good about it. The single biggest driver, Damon, of increasing the likelihood of that kind of purchase is the degree to which customers report a high level of confidence in the decision they're making on behalf of their company. So We call that decision confidence. And part of the conclusion was we need to run everything through this lens of customer confidence. Now, there's sort of this weird sort of what we call a false positive here, because what happens is when CEOs, CROs hear that, they say, yeah, we agree. That's why we need customers to be confident. We totally agree with you, Brent. They've got to be confident in our value. They've got to be confident in our people. We've got to be trusted advisors. They got to be confident as thought leaders. They got to be confident in our brand and our product. And the kicker of all this data is when you peel it back a little bit, as we walk through this in the book, is when you look at the dimensions of confidence that lead to this incredible commercial outcome, it has nothing to do with the supplier at all. It's all supplier agnostic. It's customers asking, how confident are we even asked the right questions? How confident are we that we've thoroughly explored alternatives? How confident are we that we've done enough research? How confident are we that we're even aligned with each other on what we're even trying to do in the first place? None of that has anything to do with whether or not you're a trusted advisor. And this, to me, this is why I quit my job and stopped everything in the middle of my 50s and put it all on. It's like I went all in on black or red or whatever, because it's like, I'm going to write a book and tell the world about this stuff. Which is footnote, but terrifying. Because I think there's this huge opportunity we're all walking past, which is, yes, we've been trying for decades to make customers or help customers feel more confident in us. We're just walking right past the single biggest opportunity, which is helping customers feel more confident in themselves. And that's where frame making comes in, because in this world where they're overwhelmed with decision complexity, they're overwhelmed with too much information, they're overwhelmed with objective misalignments, trying to get themselves agreed on what they're even trying to do. They're also overwhelmed by just figuring out overcoming outcome uncertainty, which is what Matt and Ted write about in Jolt, for example, this fear of messing up. It's like, we know you've shown us great results for 4 other companies, but we'll screw it up anyway because we're different, right? So in this kind of world, there's this real interesting opportunity for sellers to show up and not just talk about how great their brand is, how great their company is, or try to build trust so that you trust me or to demonstrate their expertise. Rather, it's to take these things that are so big and so hard and so overwhelming. Like, so I'm at this company with 19 of my colleagues trying to make a decision. I don't know how we make a decision. How do we do that? It'd be nice if someone could just help, like, kind of take us by the hand figuratively and just guide us through that sort of, right? Like a coach, right? I mean, you're a sports guy, right? So it's like having a really, really good coach is just someone who's there to not tell you what to do, but to give you enough agency so that they can give you the options to put a framework around it, right? There's a couple ways we can get good at this, Damon, right? You can do it like this. You can do it like this. We find with other athletes of your stature, your weight, or your size, or your skill, there's sort of these 3 things you might consider. And I kind of leave it up to you to decide, do I want to do the work? Do I want to do that work? Do I want to do it that way or this way? So I'm leaving you agency because I want you to feel confident in yourself. And so you've got to feel like this is my decision. So if I just show up and say, Damon, here's what you need to do, these 3 things, like, that kind of works. But what we find in our research,
you're just telling me then,
right?
You're just telling
exactly.
Me, yeah.
And what we find in our research, at least in sales, that backfires. Customers are actually if you just show up and say, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. Here's what you need to buy, or here's what you need to do. We find that in that environment, at least in sales, customers are actually less confident, not more. They're less likely to buy, not more. So rather than just showing up and sort of brute forcing.
But why is that? Why is that? You think?
Well, you tell me. What do you think? I think it's really interesting. What's your take on that?
I think it's because they want to be working with somebody who it's not their first rodeo. Let's get that.
Right.
I think that's important.
That's fair. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when it comes to agency, they want to feel like if they're going to make this decision, which could cost millions of dollars for their enterprise, that they're confident in it and that they feel like they've helped at least co-create what that decision is.
Totally.
Not that it's being pushed on them, but it's right. Like, I believe in this. I'm confident. I want to move forward with it. I think that's probably what it is. I know, I agree with you. And so I think it's, if I'm solving for not your confidence in me, but I'm solving for your confidence in you, then it needs to be based on the decision that you're making, or at least to your point, co-creating or collaboratively decide. It's like you've got skin in the game, right? You haven't just outsourced it to me. And there's a whole kind of rant / riff on the consulting industry here, but let's park that. That's actually kind of interesting. But one of the things that as a result of this is really interesting, because you made a point, which is interesting to me, is like, it kind of has to not be your first rodeo. And so there's even ways around that in this world that are really interesting. Let's say I'm a 27-year-old seller and I don't have a lot of experience, and I can't say I've been doing this for 30 years. But you know what I can do, Damon, is I can give you an answer to your number one question. And this is somewhat
tongue in cheek, but somewhat not, right? It's like, I mean, you've been in business for decades, right? So, like, what is the one thing your customers want to know about more than anything else? More often than it feels like they want to know what other companies like them have done, or other companies like them do, right? Right? It's like, we just want to know what other, and by the way, they'll also say, we're totally different in our company. And then they'll say, but we want to know what other companies like. It's like,
everybody's different.
Right?
Everybody's
I know,
different.
It's like, how can both of those things be true? How can you be totally different and want to know what other companies like you are doing? But that's where we are. So, but notice that opens up this really interesting opportunity, particularly for newer sellers. And I've literally been through this in my own career, which is, I may not know because I haven't sold for 30 years, but it doesn't matter because you're not trying to trust me. What you want to know is what other companies are doing. Well, either for my own personal experience or the experience of my company and my colleagues, if I can sort of, aggregate that and present it back to you and say, Damon,
curate it back.
Right, exactly. And say, it's funny you should ask that, because in working with other customers like you're facing the same challenge, we've kind of learned a couple things. Some of them are a little surprising, but here's what they tell us, what they wish they'd done differently. Here's what they think they tell us are like the three most important questions for them, at least. And notice in that case, I don't need to precede that with, I've been doing this for 30 years, right? It's like, so my value in that world is no longer as an expert. My value is as a connector, right? My value is giving you the one thing you don't have on your own, which is access. It's access to other companies. And so this idea of frame making, and flip side is, at the same time, I'm offering you social proof from other companies like you, which helps you feel more confident in yourself to make a decision within that framework that I've just established by reporting to you what other companies are thinking.
I think what's gold, what you said right there, introducing it as, in in working with other customers or other companies, here's what we've seen.
And we call this sort of approach, playing the role of a connector rather than an expert. And I think, when I go talk to college kids, we call them kids because we're old, right? Get off my lawn. But when I go talk to college students who are in sales, like down at the University of Texas at Dallas, for example, one of the best sales programs in the country. Howard Dover runs that program. And there's others around the country that are really exceptional. And so I often will meet them either in person or oftentimes in Zoom classes where their cameras are off and they're in their pajamas, and it's kind of funny. But I share this idea with them because, to me, it's especially as exciting as a 23-year-old or 22-year-old fresh out of college, and you're now a BDR and you're tasked with like calling on directors and VP level executives, and like, who the heck am I to be talking to these people? And I love this approach because it opens up an equally powerful opportunity for you as it does for someone who's been doing this for 30 years, right? You can add value from day one by just helping that customer understand what other companies like them are doing.
I really like that, from a learn it perspective, like what we do. Sometimes I'm a big believer of bringing in people relatively new, who have great attitude and aptitude, but they don't have all that experience. And what I'm hearing you say is, in our business, if we're selling to a chief of people officer or a human resource officer who's been in this for 25 years, and I'm somebody in my early 20s, that I can come across as, reputable and add value by taking this approach.
100%. And it may be, it doesn't have to be age condition, right? It could be someone who is transferred in from, exactly, someone who's in their 30s, but was a school teacher and has decided to transfer out or whatever. I'm just kind of making it up now. But, it's like, in my case, it's exactly what it was. I was, prior to my work as a researcher in sales at CEB, I was at Michigan State, where I was a researcher and teacher in German and linguistics, right? So this is a true story. I literally went from like on Friday of one week, I was a German professor, to Monday the next week, I was giving senior vice presidents of sales at the world's biggest companies advice on how to run sales forces.
Well, how's that? What's a quick version of that story? How's that happen?
Well, what happens, you learn very quickly. It's like, Brent, we're trying to figure out our key account management program. And I think, I'm like over here, like, key account, man, what is a key? Hey, Jeff, what's a key account management program? It was kind of awkward, right? And so, but what was interesting is, after about a week of that, Damon, it's like, oh, they're all asking the same question. And first of all, they're all telling me they're different. And then they're all asking the same question. And I learned almost by just out of survival skill, right? Very quickly, I learned, it's funny you should ask that, Damon, because I was just talking to two other companies and they were asking the exact same question. One of the things that one of them mentioned was really interesting. And I was just doing it sort of instinctively as a survival skill. And what I'd learned at the end of this call, I said, wow, that was really, really helpful. I so appreciate your input. I'm thinking, I didn't even do anything. Do you know what I mean? But what I did, though, and so connecting. Now today, that's exactly right. Looking back, I appreciate what I was doing by pure instinct, 100%. And that's, so there's, the things we talk about in the frame making sale, it's all based on research and bar charts because it's how I talk, but a lot of it's based on school of hard knocks. It's just like lessons learned from life too.
And I think what's important about that too, if you're a sales rep, even if you're a BDR, like let's say you're a BDR and you're trying to get meetings. I mentioned I interviewed Mark Cox, who I thought was great,
Yeah.
and we talk about the importance of personalizing your message. I mean, even coming in with your messaging and saying, "Hey, I'd love to share with you what we're seeing with others in your industry,"
Yeah.
I mean, is a great way to get in there.
In fact, because my training is linguistics, I geek out on language probably more than I should, but you can even tweak a little bit and say, work with other customers like you. One of the things we were surprised to learn is, right? And so just that word surprise, even that changes the tone, right? It changed like, oh, you're supposed
steal that.
Right? So like, there's kind of a mystery. I want to know what the surprise is. There's also a little bit of, again, humility in that. It's like, I didn't see this either. So it's almost the exact opposite saying, I'm an expert. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. It's like, dude, that was weird, but let me tell you what's weird. And so now, you see, now it feels like we're kind of in it together. Like, hey, David, check this out, man. This is kind of crazy, right? And so it's got that sort of feel to it. And maybe it's partly my upbringing. You and I were joking off air. It's true. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, right? So we're just kind of humble people. I joke, and it's true. I grew up a block from Warren Buffett, and what's interesting is, in fact, we drove by his house the other day. I showed it to my kids. That's one of the richest people in the world lives in the house, and they said, "What? In that house? It's just a normal house." And that's it, right? It's like, it's not. I grew up in a gated community. I grew up on 54th and Farnham, and he lives at 55th, right? It's just this normal house right in the middle of town, and we're all kind of that way. And so I found that bringing that kind of humility to the job of sales can be really powerful, because at the end of the day, the dirty little secret is none of us know what we're doing. And now that you're a parent and you're deep into this parenting and you're in your 50s like I am, we're at that age now, I think, where we realize not a freaking one of us knows what we're doing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's actually helped me become more humble. And tying it back to what you're saying, I also think that as a seller, if that's how you're behaving, you're coming across as more authentic and genuine.
Yes. Yeah.
And people can connect better with you. Then
Totally.
I was having a conversation with one of our reps. I was watching some of their, gong calls or whatever. And I'm like, you're just too robotic. You got to get off of the script and just be yourself and connect with your customer.
Yeah, well, and I think, again, particularly, I guess this conversation is really interesting. It's kind of focused, and I drove us there. I don't know if it was intentionally, but it's for someone sort of new in their career and starting out. But I think it's equally true for any level. But I think particularly so we worked with a lot of people right out of college at CEB, and we would put them in front of SVPs of heads, of HR, marketing, sales from day one. And it was really interesting. You could always tell the ones who were brand new on the team because they felt like they had to put on this air. Do you know what I mean? They felt like it was like almost became like the show. And it's like they had assumed a certain set of expectations, which no one had put on them, but they kind of put on themselves, given sort of like, oh, I have to sound like this, or I have to talk like this, or I have to sound. And it's like, actually, no. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, you just, I think that's one of the benefits of age is you learn like none of it really matters. It's like, we're all just fumbling through life and we're just trying to figure it out. None of us know what we're doing. And as a result, when you tap into that, it's actually quite powerful because it lets other people let their guard down too. And it won't always work. But by the way, I've tried this with some people and it was a complete flaming disaster. So it's not a guaranteed slam dunk.
But it's not just in sales. I see it, I coach and mentor a lot of, people who are moving into whether it's a sales leader role for the first time or just a leadership role for the first time.
Totally.
And they feel like they got to come in having all the answers. When instead, if they come in and saying, look, I don't know in a certain situation, but let's figure this out, and they come in and they say that with confidence, I think it goes a lot further than people can see right through, if you're coming in and you're trying to make it look like you got it all figured out. Not to give away too much of your book, but walk us through a little bit of how it works and maybe even an example of a company who's an organization or some individuals who've been implementing it where it's working really well.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So again, not with, I don't mind giving away secrets. In fact, actually, we're doing, my co-author Carl and I are doing a weekly series on YouTube/LinkedIn where we're actually going pretty deep in the book, and so we're kind of giving away already. So it's more just for the sake of time. And
by the way, I've watched it, so I'll put. I watched a couple of those episodes. They're great.
Oh, thank you. Cool.
I'll put a link to it in the episode.
Awesome. Thanks, man. In the book, we break down sort of, so we set up this idea, customers need to be confident, and it's not confident you, but confident in themselves. That matters because there's at least 4 different dimensions under which along which their confidence is under threat, which I mentioned earlier. So you got decision complexity, information overload, objective misalignment, and outcome uncertainty. And then what we do is across the book, we unpack each of those 4 and say, here's kind of what's going on. Here's why their confidence is so under threat or is so weak in these 4 areas. And then we talk about what you can do about it, adopting a sort of a frame-making approach. And then we talk about mindset stuff and some marketing things at the end of the book. But just to give you a real quick, sort of to answer your question, brass tacks example, in terms of decision complexity, right? So think about, again, maybe this example that I mentioned, my friend Randy, who's selling into this company with 20 people in a buying group that have never made a decision together. And they're like, I don't, like we're going to struggle. We don't even know how to do this, right? So in frame making, we break it down almost like in Challenger, which we had teach, tailor, take control. In frame making, we have the letter E we use 3 times. So it's establish, engage, and execute, which makes it easier. See how it works? It's the ease of framing. But establish is we need to figure out like what kind of frame do we want to put around buying complexity? Then how do we engage customers with that frame? And then how do we execute over time? And so real quickly, Damon, one of the things we talk about in this section of the book is what we call it turns out that audit. And that sounds really wonky, I know. And it's kind of somewhat on purpose. We made it sound wonky because I think it's funny. But I often, and in the book, I do this too. I do this on stage a lot. It's like, what are the 4 worst words you can hear in sales? The 4 worst words you can hear in sales is when your customer black holes on you and finally after weeks of waiting, appears out of nowhere and starts the conversation with, it turns out that. Because anything, right? You've had that conversation. I've had that conversation. Because whatever they say next is going to be bad, right? It's like a relationship call that starts with "we need to talk." It's all downhill from there, right? Yeah. But what's interesting to me, all joking aside, is almost inevitably what they say next, they're surprised about. It turns out their legal team need to look this over and they've got some questions. It turns out our procurement officer has got some new rules in place. It turns out that our capital review board has to, and are like, and what's interesting to me is when they say that, they're almost inevitably kind of surprised. They didn't know they were about to run into that hurdle inside their own company. And yet as a seller, more often than not, your reaction as a seller is like, oh God, let me guess. It's legal, isn't it? Right. And so that actually what that describes is an asymmetry of information. What you can do better than your customers themselves is predict the obstacles that they're going to run into in their own buying process. And so it creates this opportunity to say, well, what if we were to sit down as a team inside our own company and run what I call it turns out that audit, which is a dorky way of saying, what if we were to sit down and just kind of figure out, make a list of like all the ways that our deals have gone off the rails over the last 6 to 18 months due to some sort of obstacle inside the customer organization that customers themselves hadn't anticipated. Where do things get stuck inside a typical buying group inside the customer organization? And then do the 80-20 on that. 80% of the time, it's this 20% of the problems that they don't see coming. And that gives you then an opportunity to talk to other customers about it. So this gets from that's established and engages in working with other customers like you. We find that, as excited as you are to work with a solution, we're excited to work with you. And we can't wait to get this off the ground. But inevitably what seems to happen is we're going to get 3 months into this process and then procurement's going to jump in and they're going to have 3 really hard questions that have torpedoed other companies on the same journey. And I hate to see that happen to you. And so talking to a couple of companies that have managed to navigate this successfully, one of the things they've actually given us some ideas on, they're really smart, I think, is to actually bring procurement in early. And you can kind of go on from there, right? So in other words, I can begin to coach you on how to navigate your journey based on what I've learned from others who either have successfully or less successfully navigated that. And so, and then what you could do after that, then the execute, that's the engage and execute is then we could actually essentially document that, put that in sort of a process plan, what we call a sequence of events, which is an idea taken from the IT sector, and actually just map out not a map of how we run our sales process, but a map for the customer and how they need to navigate their own company. And that's the brass tacks kind of stuff. That's what we're getting into in the book.
No, I like that. And, for our listeners out there, one of the things that I'd even kind of recommend is if you're thinking about to yourself, like, it turns out that, like, how does that relate to our business? If you are using Fathom or Gong or Chorus or any of these, take all those calls, run them through and see what comes up most often. I'm sure there's the standard ones, like it gets stuck in procurement or legal or whatever, but you could even maybe specialize them for your own business.
Oh, totally. You can imagine that conversation. Hey, Dima, I'm so excited we're making progress. I can't wait to welcome you into as a customer. some came up the other day. It's kind of weird. We were talking to another customer and they ran to this thing we've never seen before, but they've got this person on their team. The title is this, is like, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go, so bear with me. But it's like, have you seen anything like that before? You say, no, I haven't. Well, here's kind of what to look for. In other words, you see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of adopting this approach of coach. And I'm just helping you kind of think of like, and hopefully what I'm trying to do is create a moment where you think, wow, I didn't even think of that. That's actually a great idea. This guy just saved me a lot of pain and heartache. I love working with Brent because he just helps me kind of figure these things out.
And Brent, think about it. If you're able to do that, you're setting yourself apart from other sellers at other organizations who maybe, like you said, the product can be just as good. But if you're somebody who's like looking at something differently and helping them navigate internally, I mean, that's a great way to go.
So you asked about a company that's doing this well. We pretty extensively in a couple different places in the book profile the work of a company called Expedient. They're out of Ohio and Pennsylvania, and it's a cloud services company. And they're a regional/national player now, up against, we all know who's in the cloud computing business, right? So they're up against these massive organizations, and we go into a lot of detail in the story. But when I first met him, Brian Smith was the head of sales at Brian with a Y. Was the head of sales at Expedient. And when I profiled them in HBR, that's where he was. But Brian has since, not surprisingly, to be honest, been promoted to the CEO. So it's now he's running the company. He's literally, Damon, probably one of the smartest commercial leaders I've ever met. And he's just, because he's a Midwesterner, he's a really good dude. And when I was presenting some of the sense making work, which is frame making for information, which we haven't talked about it as much, but I was presenting some of that work to his team, and we kind of did this sort of approach of, establish and engage and execute. We ran through that with information. We walked through all that in the book. But as part of that meeting, he stood up at the end of the meeting and he said something that stuck with me. Every once in a while you hear someone say something like, I need to remember that. That's really good. And he said something that I've since had, with his permission. I've heard him say it multiple times since then. And we actually made an entire chapter about this in the book. We call it the frame making mindset. And he said this to his team. He said, guys, we have one job. This is our job as a sales organization. As we go to market, if we want to stand out, our job is simply to help our customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. That's it. He says, if we solve for that and keep that as our North Star, we will always win in the long run. And inevitably, when I hear Brian say this, there's always, I don't know if it's a plant or just someone who's just, it's like, oh, you're brave. But anyway, someone will raise their hand and say, but Brian, what happens if we help our customers make the best decision they can and they choose to not choose, or they choose for the competition? And Brian will always say, that's why the second part of the quote matters in as little time as possible, because he says it's sales, guys. And if we're going to lose, I want to lose early, right? As we all kind of know that in sales, but how many of us just push this deal deep into the pipeline 12, 18 months in when we know it's not going anywhere? And he says, but if our posture, the way we show up is by helping our customers make the best decision they can. And as early on, it turns out it's not us, then that's great. Then we know and we walk away. We say, I'll tell you something. When it comes time for them to make the next decision, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember how we interact with them. They're going to remember how we help them. And we're going to be the first ones they call. And that's how we're going to grow over time. And that's the company I want to be. And that's why he's the CEO now.
I also think, Brent, too, if you're shortening the sales cycle, it's giving them less opportunity to go out and explore other places, because you're moving the sale along in the process.
100%. And even if you lose, I mean, look, nobody likes to lose in sales. Nobody likes to lose, period, right? Or a few of us do. But but there may be some out there. I don't. That's good. That's a different podcast. But anyway, but the opportunity cost of time, right? I mean, like, there's nothing like the pig and the python. Just a huge number of stalled deals in the middle of your pipeline have all been sitting there for 12 to 18 months, and you're still chasing them rather than chasing stuff that's actually going to come in. And that's part of what I talk to lots and lots of sales leaders, and that is by far their single biggest frustration is bad or ineffective qualification, right? It's like, why do we keep spending our time chasing stuff that's never going to come in? And there's all sorts of reasons why. That's a whole nother episode we could do. But
that's a whole nother episode I was going to say, because a lot of it has to do with either self-awareness or just lying to yourself. I mean, we don't need to go on that tangent,
but that's comp plans and confidence in yourself and 1,000 other things, right? And your territory planning, if it's the only thing I have to go after, I have no choice. There's lots of things that are wrapped up into that. But I just love it. So we with Brian's permission, we took this, we call it the frame making mindset. So the frame making mindset, Damon, is how do we help our customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. And we're wrapping the whole thing around that and solving for customers, not perception of you, but perception itself. And if I had to kind of sum it all up, and I always do this at the end of my keynotes, or almost always, if I haven't vibed with the audience, I don't do this because it gets a little personal, I suppose. But let's see if you, I don't know, see if you may dig this, but I'll ask the audience to take a moment and think about someone really important in their lives, someone they really love, a spouse, a child, a friend. It could be someone from the present day, someone from the past, but someone when you think of them, you just kind of smile inside. And if we're not everyone of us has someone like that, but hopefully somewhere in your life you've had that kind of relationship with somebody. Even better, you have one now. But I tell them is I think about that person for a minute. And what's really interesting about that relationship is you probably are thinking about that person like, I love you because I love you. But I also love you because I love me when I'm around you. And that's special. And not many of us have a lot of those in our life. And you find someone like that, hang on to them is what I would tell anyone listening today is now that I'm in my 50s, because I've had a few of those and I've lost them over time for whatever reasons. If you've got someone in your life where you think, I love you not just because I love you, but I love you because I love me when I'm around you. When you look in the mirror and you think, I love this version of me that results from interacting with that person, that is one of the most meaningful sources of happiness, I think, in your life. And not to be sort of crass about it or banal, but that's kind of what I'm asking in this book. The frame making sale is, what would it take for you to be that kind of salesperson for your customer? Where as a result of that interaction, your customer thinks, I kind of feel better about myself as a result of interacting with Damon. I think I want to interact with Damon a little bit more. And that's how we're trying to change the sales profession with this book.
And I would assume having a high level of empathy or learning to have a high level of empathy plays a major role.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole chapter in this frame making mindset chapter, we dig into this idea of empathy and curiosity, and specifically curiosity around not just what I want you to know, but what I want you to feel and how does it feel like now. So I teach this, this is an idea I literally, again, made up from the School of Hard Knocks, and they kind of systematized it, turned it into this idea, and I put it in the book, which I call hypothesis-led empathy. And it's, because people say, well, either you're empathetic or you're not. It's nature, it's not nurture. I can't teach you how to be empathetic, but I kind of can. At least what I can do is I can teach you how to approximate empathy. And I used to do this with our teachers and what we call.
What do you mean approximate empathy?
Yeah. So here's the technique in a nutshell. So at CEB, we have, again, a whole bunch of 20-somethings out presenting to a bunch of sales leaders, and you wanted to make a connection. And I used to tell people, as you present our research, it was exactly what you're talking about with your sales team on the gong calls. Like, it's kind of robotic. So I'm walking you through research. Here's a bar chart. It says this. Okay, moving on. Here's another bar chart. And here's a graph. It's like, oh God, you're not wrong, but you're not interesting either. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So and that sounded harsh, but hopefully I wouldn't say quite like that, but I'd say, all right, let's stop.
But it's true.
Right, it kind of is, right?
It is true. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And so what I would do is I'd say, all right, think about this page. And so maybe a page with a bar chart on it. I say, all right, tell me what the bar chart says. And we go through that, and I just make sure they're locked down on what the bar chart says and the teaching points and all that kind of stuff. All right, now, and then I say, all right, so that's what you want your audience to know. And then for people who've been through this before, they're always like, oh, I know what he's going to do next, right? But it's like, all right, now here's what I want to ask you this. What do you want your audience to feel on this page? And they would all look at me like I was crazy and say, well, do you want them to feel excited? Do you want them to feel scared? Do you want them to feel confused? Do you want them to feel overwhelmed? Because every one of these slides had a sort of not just a teaching point, but an emotional point, depending on where we were in the narrative. And so we kind of tease that out, and they say, well, I want them to feel, I don't know, like frustrated. I say, okay, now give me 4 words synonymous with frustrated, overwhelmed, whatever. We'd write them on the whiteboard, right? And we put all those words, and I said, okay, now present this page to me one more time, but you've got to use at least 3 of those words as part of your presentation. And they do it again. And then we do this, we call them master classes. And we do this again.
Give me an example of when they come back to you and do it again. What does that sound like?
So let's take a look at this bar chart here, because there's something kind of scary about this when you unpack it, because what's really going on is something that not all of us would be sort of thinking about, but it's kind of surprising, but not surprising in a really positive sort of way. See what I'm doing? It's very subtle, but I'm just weaving emotion through. I'm telling you how to feel about this. You see what I'm saying? I'm guiding your emotions.
I wanted you to do that because you're kind of a master with words, like we brought up earlier, just throwing in surprising, and
it's
so
you're adding that emotion for me.
Yeah,
it's totally instinctive for me. I just do it with the site. I don't even have to think about it, right?
But Brent, let me just stop you right there, because our listener might think, well, look, it's not instinctive for me, but that's okay, because you're saying it can be learned.
Well, exactly, because after we do this exercise, they represent it with using 3 of those words. Inevitably, the other 4 people in the room that were doing the master class with us would look at me and say, what did you just do? They're so different. And I said, I didn't do anything. I just sat here. They did it. I didn't do it, but they just used it because what they're doing is they're making an emotional connection and not just a cognitive one. And so going back to this hypothesis-led empathy, this idea is sometimes you don't know if something's scary or if you don't know if something's exciting. So I had to learn this again the hard way when I was talking to all these heads of sales as a German professor. I'd say, sometimes I'd just be super open and naive and kind of humble about it. Say, man, if that were me, I would imagine that's pretty scary. Is that as scary as I think it is? And I've probably done that to you in this conversation, right? And you might say, oh, Brent, you have no idea. So now I'm making a mental note. Okay, that's really scary. Or they might say, no, actually, it's okay. And I'm thinking, okay, not scary. You know, it almost doesn't matter if I get it right. I'm just putting an emotion out there.
You're putting it out there. Yeah.
Right. And then I'm calibrating their reaction to that emotion. So next time I talk to someone about the same topic, I'm going to say, I've talked to a couple of sales leaders and a couple say this is kind of scary. Some of them feel pretty good about it. Where are you on this? And I do that enough times, and eventually it would kind of sort of coalesce around one clear emotion. And eventually it becomes this. This is really scary, isn't it? Do you see what I'm saying? And it's like, oh, you have no idea. And now we just made this connection. And I got there because I hypothesized my way there, and I used inputs to kind of circle in on the most common emotion. And but you'll find so one of my jobs at CB was to write the script that we used to present all this work. And if you go through all those literally millions of words I wrote for CB, you'll find every single sentence, every single page at least, packed with words that expressed some kind of emotion. And I think if you go back and listen to your gong calls of your sales team and you try this technique and say, do it again, but just put in a couple of these words around this emotion, see what happens. I think you'll find it changes everything.
In what way does it change everything? It makes them feel differently to customers?
Yeah. It's like, it makes it feel more human. It makes it feel more authentic. It makes it feel less transactional.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. It gives permission implicitly to talk about that more human side of things. No head of sales is going to volunteer, hey, Brent, I'm really scared about this. Or very few of them are. But over time, I've got heads of sales that tell me that all the time because we've created that kind of connection with each other because I've essentially created an environment where that's on the table. Right.
And they can feel a little bit more vulnerable to express that to you.
100%. And now I can do a better job of helping them feel confident if I sort of know their current state of emotional being. Because remember, what I'm solving for is solving for customers' confidence themselves. I'm not solving for what they know. I'm solving for what they feel. And to solve for what they feel, I got to kind of know what they feel now. And I got to understand how big's that delta and in which direction. And it's so interesting when you look at the single biggest driver of customers making high quality, low regret deals is not what they know. It's what they feel. And yet we're solving so much for I want you to know this about my product. I want you to know this about my value. I want you to know this about the ROI. I want you to know this about my raving fans. And we're solving for what we want our customers to know. And we're walking right past this massive opportunity to solve for what we want our customers to feel.
When you're working with customers, are you trying to get access to the other stakeholders to help them get more confident as well? Or is your goal really to make them feel more confident themselves to go and present or go work with the other stakeholders?
Yes and yes. So it's whichever, like both things need to happen. So one of the big challenges, this is one of these 4 big challenges we talk about in the book, is this idea of objective misalignment, where you've been there, you're a sales guy just like I am, right? So, how many times has your customer said, if it were just up to me?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
But what's different, I know where you're going. I don't mean to cut you.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly, right? But IT feels differently.
Right.
HR feels different. But keep going. Yeah.
Or the other one, which is, I love what you guys do. I'm so excited to partner with you. But, we had a conversation internally. We've decided to go in a different direction. I've had a couple of those even recently and lost a lot of money as a result, right? And it's so frustrating. And what you realize is they were confident in your product. They were confident in your value. It's like all these things you were solving for, you'd already won that battle. What they weren't confident in, which they never told you about, was whether or not their peers or their boss or whoever was prioritizing the same problem or the same solution or the same approach as they were. And they had to go sort that bit out. And so in that chapter on frame making, we spend a lot of time unpacking some of the techniques you can use to help your stakeholder, either by doing it directly to your point, like let's all get in a room on a Zoom call or literally in a room.
Which is ideal if you could, right?
Yeah. And you get into big enterprise sales, it's literally what they do. It's like companies like, I don't know, like a GE or a Siemens or whatever, just to make some up, they'll actually have these alignment workshops where they'll get all the stakeholders from the customer organization in a room for like a day and a half. We used to profile an approach like this from Cargill, and they would do these day and a half workshops with their biggest customers, where the whole thing was about aligning the customer stakeholders with each other on what are they even trying to do. Not, I want to put you in a room and for a day and a half and convince you how great we are. That was never the point. Is that let's get in a room together and see if we can help you guys just reach agreement on what are you even trying to do. And based on what you're trying to do, then we can explore whether we're a good partner for you. But if you can't make that happen, you're going to get these calls like we decided to go in a different direction, or if it were just up to me, or it's maddening.
So the book's coming out in September, but you're already working with customers on
Yeah.
this. It's through workshop coaching, stuff like that.
The company we built around this is called A to B Insight, and if anyone's read Challenger Customer, you'll know where that comes from. But it's a insight technique. Not that it matters, sorry. But I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm at Brent at a2binsight.com. There's a whole nother thing which we could talk about either today or some other time. But we're so long now. I'm guessing your listeners have all gone off to lunch. But but the other thing I've become really interested in, Damon, something you and I chatted briefly about is like, so after the keynote's done, so this is all keynotes, workshops, training. That's how we're going to get frame making out in the world, very much like how we got Challenger out in the world. And I'm super excited to talk to companies who want this in front of their team and want to do training with us. We're building the training now. So if anyone's interested, look me up. Let's get it happening. There's this other thing I'm doing, which is called Qs, QOOS, and it's Qs.ai is the website. And Qs is irrespective of framing. So Qs is content agnostic, whereas frame making is very much about the content. Qs is much more about delivery, which is, the thing we all find very frustrating about training is that it's once and done. It's event based. It's sheep dip. And it never sticks. So the idea of Qs is, what if we were to take all that training content and break it into sort of micro actions and take those micro actions and embed it right in the flow of work, so it's delivered just in time to your sellers as they need that help. That to me is the other side of this. I think super, super interesting. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch, like world-class content, frame making, world-class delivery with Qs. And I'm really busy. I'll tell you, man, there's a lot going on.
No, I mean, I might even, if you want to, we should even just do a whole episode just talking about, the value of, there's more than just a one and done when it comes to
we should
training,
that's because
right?
That's your bailiwick. That's your wheelhouse.
And that's
right?
that's our sweet spot,
Exactly. So that'd be fun. That's a fun conversation we could maybe do on another call is dig into that. How do we help adults not just learn, but do and maintain and develop over time and get better? Because so much, I think you would agree, and I'll be careful how I put it, because I would imagine this is something that frustrates all of us in the training and sort of skill building environments. How much time is spent and wasted on just like trying to get people better and nothing ever happens, right? And it's maddening, isn't it? Like, and so
it is maddening.
We're trying to solve for that.
I think one of the things you and I talked about before is
the
individuals and their leaders. And again, this isn't just for sales. I'm not just calling out sales here. Is them understanding the importance of getting better and continue. I call it like a learn it all versus a know it all. A know it all, they already have all the answers figured out, where learn it all knows that in order to stay relevant, especially with all this stuff going on with AI and everything, that you got to be continuously learning and growing and evolving. I mean, Brent, you're awesome. And you're an amazing storyteller. We all know that.
My wife would tell you differently, but that's not, I'm kidding.
Really? Does your wife tell you? Like my wife tells me, I just tell the same stories over and over again all the time.
My wife tells me to take out the trash. It's like, it's Tuesday, get the trash cans out.
Same day for me, man. What is one more thing you could leave us with, either around sense making or your book, frame making and sales?
To be a quick thought, because the book will be out in the fall. Again, we're doing keynotes, training on it now. I would love to work with everyone out there's got a Salesforce that's looking to build these skills. The one thing I would tell you is this, and I used to say the same thing about Challenger, and eventually I kind of lost the battle. But people are already saying, oh, this frame making thing you're talking about, is maybe that's the methodology we should adapt or adopt. And the one word, and this may be like tilting at windmills, but I'm trying very, very hard not to use the word methodology, Damon. Because what I find is the word methodology overpromises and underdelivers, and it did the same for Challenger. People are sometimes frustrated with Challenger because it doesn't help them with this or that or that. It's like, it was never meant to help you with that. You know what I mean? It's a way to engage customers in a really powerful conversation. Frame making is very much like that. It's a customer engagement strategy. It's not how to run a better pipeline per se. We think your pipeline will get more healthy by doing this, but it's not a sales process. And the reason why that matters is because sellers can get really confused. Like, what you just told me to do, I don't know, Wilson or Miller Hyman or whatever it might be. And now you're telling me to do Challengers. Do I do that or do I do this? And I think it's like a stop, start, or an either or. And I'm so much more interested in just getting these frame making concepts sort of sprinkled across the top of everything everyone's doing, as opposed to saying, stop everything you're doing, do this instead.
Does the frame making concepts work for opportunities that aren't large, complex deals?
Yes. I think they absolutely do. That's a longer conversation, because I think what you find is, even in sort of more simple stuff,
I'm
In
not
fact,
talking about transactional. I'm talking about something in
but
the middle.
actually, even there though. So I mean, this is actually how the book opens, and I do this riff on stage all the time. Um, there's two kinds of people in the world, Damon. And there's what we call maximizers and satisficers. Is based on Kahneman stuff. He won the Nobel Prize for, and depending on which
the
of those.
best. Yeah.
This guy's a freaking genius, right? But depending on where you fall on that continuum, this story makes no sense or totally you relate to it. But the brief version is, it's shopping on Amazon. So this is totally consumer, very transactional. Did you ever do that thing where you go on Amazon, maybe you're buying a new pair of gym shorts or a pair of, like something stupid, like a pair of socks or a dongle. I always tell the story in terms of a dongle. I need like a 5-inch dongle to connect my new USB-C everything to my laptop because it's like so frustrating. No big deal. I go to Amazon, I'm going to buy a dongle, $7, should take 5 minutes. You go in, you put in like, I don't know, in the search box, dongle, USB, all that kind of stuff. And Amazon says, no problem. Here's 1,500 options. Like, okay, that's overwhelming. And it's like, I kind of knew that was coming, but that's okay. But Amazon's like, let me help you narrow it down. That's really hard. So here's Amazon's choice, or here's customer's pick, or here's top seller. So I go to one of those, like, okay, it's got 4.8 stars. It's got 7-inch dongle, USB-C, great. Yep, okay, let's put it in the cart. Hold on, wait. Before I put it in the cart, let me just do one real quick thing. Let me just read a couple of these reviews to make sure I'm not a schmo and buying something stupid. And if you read reviews, yep, sounds good. All right, okay, one last thing. There's a couple of these 1 stars. Maybe just take a look at those 1 stars real quick. You look at the 1 stars. Like,
I do that.
Right.
Yep.
We all do this, right? It's like, do not
I
buy.
totally do that. Yep.
Broken 30 seconds. You're a chump if you buy this. You're thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. I can't do this. It's like, oh God, dodged a bullet there. Let me look at the next one. That's 4.78 stars. It's not quite the same. And all of a sudden, like 3 hours later, you're still on Amazon shopping for freaking gym shorts or a dongle or whatever. Now you're really frustrated because like this was supposed to take 5 minutes. Now it's taking 3 hours and you're getting really frustrated. And you don't hate Amazon. You kind of hate yourself, right? And it's
totally.
like, oh, blessed, right? And you get really annoyed. And the sort of the way this story ends is like, it's like Amazon's got a button, and the button, if you press that button, all the pain stops. And everyone thinks the button is buy now, but you can't buy now because you're still kind of caught in the circle. But the button they do have that makes the pain stop is save for later. And if you press save for later, the pain stops. You don't get your dongle, but you don't have to deal with this anymore. And you'll come back to it later. And you never do. And so the punchline of the whole story, which is absolutely true, is I always say, because I check on a regular basis because I tell the story this often, but I checked on my wife's Amazon account the other day, and she has 582 items saved for later. Right?
You got to be careful with that. You don't want to hit buy all by mistake.
What? That's a fair point. Millions and millions of dollars. But this is like super simple, super transactional, relatively easy, you would think, purchases. Just like, I'll just come back to it later. I got to look at this a little longer. There's more here than I thought. I'm not going to do it right now. And so it kind of makes me wonder, how does commerce still happen? And if someone would just say, look, dude, like a lot of people out there travel like you do, it's like, it's probably one of these three. Just buy one of these, you'll be fine. It's like, all right, it's like, what are the three questions I need? It's like, if someone could help me and Amazon tries to do that a little bit with Amazon's choice, but you're still overwhelmed.
Now I'm going to, but what frustrates me is I'll have a selection that I'm ready to buy, right? And even if I do look at a 1 star, but then it says, Amazon also recommends this. So here's 3 things, and
you're off to the races again.
I'm off to the races again, saying,
right. Oh, maybe I do need that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's so the point, so there's a long answer to a very simple, short question, which is, does this present and frame making work downstream from complex sales? And I think this goes all the way into B2C. And you see it in B2C with things like real estate agents. Or one of the examples we use in the book is like, it's been a while for me, but if you remember the first time, maybe the only time, depending on your perspective, you bought a diamond ring for a spouse. It's like, I was 24. I was a broke grad student. I was borrowing money from my dad. He took me to a jeweler. It's like, I don't know a bleeping thing about diamonds. He's like, all right, industry standards, there's 4 C's. There's cut, clarity, and color, and whatever the other carats, right? And it's like, all right, so basically he took a framework, said, now here's the trade-offs, here's how to think about it. You can get this for that, you move this. It's almost like a graphic equalizer. You can move them up and down and the price will change. And they take something that's so completely mind-bendingly new and overwhelming, and kind of boil it down to like something you can at least manage so that you feel a little bit better about the choice. So same thing with a real estate agent. If you're a new home buyer, right?
Brent, let me just stop you right there. My wife's a real estate agent, an excellent one. Sometimes I feel like I'm a sales coach behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times it's so true, and I'll let you carry on. But it's like the buyers are just lacking confidence in themselves.
100%.
Because that's a massive, it's a massive decision.
It's a massive decision. And I would imagine if you were to ask your wife about this, if she were, or just run this by her and says, you would say anything like this? I got to imagine more times than once in her career, she said something to a young couple. Maybe it's a young couple buying their first home. I've worked with a lot of other young couples like you, and I know it's really, really overwhelming. It's kind of a big event. It's a scary event, and you're really worried about making the wrong choice. What we found in working with young couples like you is it really kind of boils down to these 3 or 4 questions that seem to matter more than anything else. Number of bedrooms, school. I'm making this up at this point, but it's like, so what I've just done is now that's frame making. And that's taking something that's big and hard and overwhelming and putting a framework. Now, if your wife were to show up and say, hey guys, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've worked with a lot of young couples, and let me tell you, this is the house for you. You need to buy this home right now. I think
you're telling.
Right, you see what I'm saying? You feel the difference between those two things, right? And that's the difference between telling and sense making, or telling and frame making. And I think, so to your point about, I think there's a huge role for this frame making idea in B2C and in transactional and down market and simple stuff. And I'm hoping, knock on wood, this book takes off in anything close to challenger sale. We'll see, but I think if it does, it's going to be because people see in this story a very human interaction that
I think
resonates.
That's important, that as you're framing this book, that idea right there for real estate agents is huge, right? I'm not
financial planners, bankers, accountants, lawyers, all of it. It's like all of those places where I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. Is an opportunity for frame making.
And I think what's great about what we talked about before you went on the air was, at the end of the day, if you could just make people feel a little bit better about themselves when it comes to doing this, I think that it's great. Well, Brent, you've been awesome. I mean, we talked about a ton of stuff,
everything
from challenger sales to sense making. I really like your phrase, in working with other customers like you, which is key for people maybe even going from accounting to sales, or right out of college into sales. It gives them an opportunity to have a seat at the table with senior VPs and so much more. You're awesome. Again, the best place to connect with you, LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yeah. And again, I'm at Brent at A2Binsight.com, which is hard for people to remember perhaps. So just LinkedIn's the easiest thing to do.
Well, thanks. And then for our audience out there, if you're in sales at all, or if you're somebody who struggles with confidence in your decision making, or somebody who does, send this episode to them. I think there's a lot of value. I can't wait for the book to come out in September.
The frame making sale. Yeah, it's out there already. So you can pre-order it now because that helps the numbers.
Okay, well, we'll get on it. And you got to come back. You're going to have to come back again.
Okay. I'd love to, Damon. Thank you, man.
All right, everybody. As I always say, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. See ya.
The customer experience is more how you made the customer feel. It's the Maya Angelou line about they'll forget what you